We must keep the rate of growth of government spending at reasonable and prudent levels.
Candidate Reagan advocated less government.
We must reduce personal income tax rates and accelerate and simplify depreciation schedules in an orderly, systematic way to remove disincentives to work, savings, investment, and productivity.
Candidate Reagan advocated cuts in federal taxes.
We must review regulations that affect the economy and change them to encourage economic growth.
Candidate Reagan advocated reducing government intervention in the economy.
We must establish a stable, sound, and predictable monetary policy.
Candidate Reagan advocated moderate and stable growth of the economy.
Thank you very much.
And the voters responded by giving candidate Reagan an overwhelming mandate when he was elected president. President Reagan tried to keep his promises, but like most presidents, he was only partly successful. Economist Milton Friedman explains why this occurred. He discusses a political phenomenon, tyranny of the status quo.
Everywhere, whether in the United States, Great Britain, France, or Germany, a new administration has just about 6 months to make major changes that will benefit the community at large. Those changes will have bad effects on small concentrated groups. The bad effects will be visible and immediate. The good effects will be less visible, take longer to manifest themselves, and longer to be recognized. Unless the occupant of that house, Republican or Democrat, makes such changes in the first few months after being elected or re-elected, the tyranny of the status quo will assert itself and prevent further change.
In Tyranny of the Status Quo, we will examine government's potential to act as an agent for change. Joining Dr. Friedman are young adults from throughout the United States. These men and women will share the rewards or suffer the consequences of today's political decisions. Like all of us, they want improvements in our society. Like all of us, they have many different ideas as to how those improvements can be achieved.
According to the AFL-CIO, every % of unemployment in this country costs the government $30 billion in lost payroll tax deductions and unemployment compensation paid out. Union leader Jim Freeman says for that reason, any job creation bill is a plus. But he says this one is something of a disappointment.
We're dropping the bucket to what should go on. There's just too many more people out there who need help.
Freeman is well acquainted with the area of the country where the most people need help. He heads AFL-CIO Region 1, the Midwest, where industry, from the auto assembly lines in Detroit to the steel plants outside Chicago, used to keep unemployment to a minimum. He says with unemployment now worse here than anywhere else, the Midwest deserves special consideration, like a bigger percentage of the jobs bill money.
Of course, the worker who gets a job will be pleased. He receives an immediate and visible benefit. Does anyone lose?
Truckers are in a squeeze, and not only because of the recession. Deregulation multiplied the competition, but the higher taxes approved by President Reagan will hurt operators big and small. No wonder that at a small company like Frantran, they're worried. They don't support the strike, but they don't like the tax legislation either.
It should cost our company probably an additional $50,000 a year. That's on 20 trucks. It's a small company, so the tax is a heavy burden.
Man, it cuts into my, my take home, man, a couple of thousand at the end of the year. We're just getting by now.
Like the truck driver, the rest of us lose every time we buy a gallon of gas. That loss, too, is visible, but small for each of us. But how about the people who lose their jobs because we have less to spend? They won't realize that the tax to pay for the jobs bill cost them their jobs.
When you turn to the problem that is of so much concern to so many people today about how we achieve renewed industrial and economic progress, how we get out of the stagnation that we've been in for the last 10 years with almost no change, no growth in industrial productivity or in output. You get into a whole lot of proposals, many of which are in some ways self-defeating. You have the standard example of the smokestack industries declining, the steel, automobile, and so on, of the high-tech industries, computers, and so on, rising. So we have proposals on the one hand that you subsidize a high-tech industry, the smokestack industry, so they stay here. You subsidize a high-tech industry so that they can compete, supposedly, with Japan or other high-tech countries. they're self-defeating. And that in turn leads everybody to talk about, well, we ought to have a central economic plan which would avoid all these self-defeating things.
Well, I think there's absolutely no sense to any sort of protectionism or subsidization of industry. But I do have a question for you. Given that, I agree with you. What do you do with displaced 40, 50-year-old workers who, for practical purposes, really can't be retrained for another profession or put out of work, say in the automobile industry?
Maybe you don't do anything about it. What can you do about it?
Well, I don't know. The thing is, if you do provide the subsidy to the industry so these people stay employed, then you're promoting this sort of thing. And it just gets worse and worse.
In industries like the automobile industry, we've had, you might say, overemployment because automobile salaries have been so high. One of the reasons that automobile salaries have been so high is that the government has protected automobile workers and steel workers and a few other foreign trade sensitive industries. They've protected them excessively from the burdens of unemployment because there are special unemployment benefits for people who lose their jobs because of foreign trade. And that has
not been a major factor. It really has.
Well,
the reason why the automobile workers and the steel workers are overpaid is because those were industries which at one time we had a great advantage over other countries in productivity. And therefore there was a great demand for workers and the industries were willing to pay high wages. Then you had those industries unionized, and the unionized unions more or less froze those high wages there when the conditions changed for which they were no longer relevant. Today it is true that the average wage in the automobile and the steel industry is nearly twice as high as the average wage of all workers in the United States.
Okay, but automobile industry workers are now that unemployment is desperate, they're willing to take cutbacks. I was in Detroit 2 years ago interviewing automobile workers, unemployed people, and there wasn't really a whole lot of distress with the idea of being unemployed because unemployment benefits were so generous that a lot of them were doing perfectly well being unemployed. So there wasn't pressure for giving give-backs in the contracts. If that pressure had come 2 or 3 years earlier, the contracts might have been reasonable enough that unemployment wouldn't be so desperate now.
That may well be true. But now we have the situation now where we have more people in those industries, and we are likely to have for a long time. We do have a very real problem that there are people of the kind Harry has talked about who are going to be unemployed. And the question is, what should or could we do about it? When we went out of the business of producing horseless carriages, there were lots of empty carriage factories. All over the West, you'll have deserted gold mines. You know, physical capital. Fundamentally, people have a great misconception. Physical capital is not really very important. What's really important is human capital. Simple example. After World War I, World War II, there was a tremendous destruction of physical capital in Europe. Within 4 or 5 years, those countries were back on target. Because what really was important is not the physical capital, it's a human capital.
Okay, so the problem is making these people switch. I mean, these people are
not making them switch, giving them an opportunity to switch.
Okay. And in my view, the government role is to let them switch as easily as possible.
What can the government do to facilitate that?
First of all, it can make sure that high-tech firms locate in the same places smokestack industry firms are located.
Even though it's much more expensive to be in those places?
Yeah.
That means fewer jobs all around, doesn't it?
Not if the government can subsidize. Not if the government can make it.
Excuse me, where does the government get the money to subsidize?
Lowell, Massachusetts, I think, is a case where it's worked. Here was an old mill town that was breaking down. Yeah. And what city planners did was they made it very attractive, and presumably they had the money to do it. They made it very attractive for high firms.
Where did they get the money from?
Probably by tax incentives.
Yeah, the problem with all of these things is we tend to look at the benefits from the money and not the harm to the people who have to pony up the money to do it.
Also, David, in a situation like Lowell, where, accepting your facts, that the local people did what is necessary, the difference between local economic planning and national economic planning is the method. Local economic planning usually means that the locals cut taxes. Of course, when you cut taxes, it's going to inspire greater economic activity. That's a much different thing than taking tax money from here in the country and putting it somewhere else. There's no reason to believe that on net that's going to increase economic activity. Of course, if you have a tax cut lower, you're going to get some more industry.
But go back to your major point. You said that the government should determine the location of the new industries. Just carry out the logic of that. See where that leads you. And see whether you really want to do that.
Well, where does it lead?
It leaves you, as you look through, with an increasingly rigid system in which people are not free. I'm not free. Here's the world. Mr. X wants to set up a plant. And now he can't do it unless he gets permission from the government to set it up somewhere, because they're going to decide where he can set it up.
I'm willing to accept that. Yeah.
You're willing to accept the government should be able to do that? Should be able to tell someone not to set up a plant? Unemployment statistics are very marginal things. I mean, in the worst state in the country, according to federal statistics, West Virginia, there's 20% unemployment.
That means 80% are unemployed.
That's right. In the best state, maybe it's 4%. Right. All right. So for the purpose of the 16 percentage differential, you're going to forbid someone to build a plant here rather than here, because this 16 percentage point differential entitles you, in your view, to deprive people in this state of jobs so you can give it to people in that state? This is like a very small basis on which to discriminate.
Whom are you kidding? Go stop for a moment. What's going to happen under such a scheme is that the politically powerful states will get plants located in their area, and the politically weak states will not.
Look at the current jobs bill.
Exactly.
West Virginia in the current jobs bill is getting $26 million out of nearly $5 billion. It's the worst state in the country. You know, absolutely the one most in need of help, and it's getting the worst, practically the worst treatment of any state in the country.
Here, that jobs bill is a marvelous example. It's supposed to create jobs by repairing what's called the infrastructure. First of all, it isn't creating any jobs, it's destroying jobs because of taxes that are being imposed are destroying more jobs than the spending will create. But in the second place, who's getting the jobs? Not the unemployed. The money is going to the states that are politically powerful, that have the clout, and it's even there, it's being spent on high-paid construction jobs, not on employing the low-paid unemployed. Let's ask a very different question for a moment. Consider these 40 to 50-year unemployed people. No government assistance whatsoever. What happens to them? Do you suppose they don't have a private incentive to try to get jobs of a different kind?
Oh, yes.
Suppose they don't have skills?
I'm sure they do.
What's the problem? The problem is a very simple one. Most of them have been earning a great deal more than they are qualified to earn in alternative skills. And they understandably don't like to see a reduction in their standard of life. I can't blame them for that. But the question is, shouldn't we congratulate them for having been so fortunate and having very high-paid jobs for so long? Or should we impose taxes on people who earned much less than they did, and who are still earning much less than they did, in order to prevent them from having to take jobs earning the same as the rest of the population?
Yeah.
That's, I think, the real issue when you come down to the nitty-gritty of it. And they will not stay unemployed. Most of them have good work habits, many of them.
Age discrimination is certainly something that's talked about. I mean, picture yourself an employer. It's easier to train somebody who's going to give you 40 years of good service.
Absolutely. And that's why I wouldn't be willing to pay as much. But if you allow the wage rate to be free, what people don't understand is that anybody who is disadvantaged, his main tool, his most effective weapon, is to be willing to work for less.
An investigation started by the state police. They contacted me about 13 months ago. And since then, they've had a number of undercover agents work in the area, trying to make undercover buys, and have been successful in, I think, 29 cases.
It's surely government's business to enforce the laws of the land, but what acts should be illegal? Can making an act illegal do more harm than good? Have we learned anything from that noble experiment, Prohibition?
Of all the problems that are bedeviling the American society, one of the most troubling and long-lasting is the problem of crime. Just as a first duty of a government is to defend its country against foreign invaders, surely the second duty is to try to prevent coercion of one citizen by another, to try to hold down crime. Here we are a nation, as a nation, far wealthier than we have been in earlier days. Surely we ought to be far more capable of providing citizens with the defense against coercion by their fellow citizens. And yet it is widely believed that crime has been on the upgrade and not the downgrade, that we've had more and more of it, and people throughout the country feel more and more threatened by it.
I think it's not the amount of money people have that makes them want to commit crime, or the lack of money they have that makes them want to commit crime, but the perceived inequalities between how much they have and how much other people have, and how much they think they deserve and how much other people have.
But in that connection also, the inequalities, the perceived inequalities and the actual inequalities are very much less today in general than they were 60, 70 years ago.
And very much less at any point in the United States than they were, say, in the 18th century in England, when there was very little crime.
Or very much less today than they are in a place like India, where you will feel safer in walking the street at night in Bombay or Calcutta than you do in walking the street in New York City.
I still maintain that there are two distinct groups in society here in America, the haves and the have-nots. And when the have-nots consistently see the haves as having all of the privileges, having all of the chances to become great and to have large amounts of material acquisition, these people become disillusioned. They say, we're in America too. We're here. We're citizens. Why is it that we don't live in nice mansions? Why is it that we don't have a car? And why is it that we can't attend Princeton, Harvard, Yale, et cetera, et cetera? And once they see these things, they say, well, I can't attain these goals the same way, so therefore I'll go about it the way I know how. I'll go buy a gun and I'll rob the Cadillac dealer. I'll go get a knife and I'll stick up the business executive. Therefore, I attain his wealth my way.
Yeah, there is a great deal to that, but that has been true all along. And there always have been, at any point in time, the haves and the have-nots. If anything, the ability to move between them has increased and not decreased. So I'm not questioning your statement about that being a source. I just find it hard to attribute the enormous increase in crime to that particular
The
source.
undermining of the family, I think, has also played a very major role probably in at least the black ghettos in the cities, because as long as you have a certain amount of stability provided for you in an environment where you're trained that certain behavior is simply not socially acceptable, you're much more likely to feel as if you are going to behave in the ways that are socially acceptable. And if you're brought up with no notion of that at all, it seems to me that there's no reason why you don't go out and just grab anything that comes your way. To me, in fact, the puzzle is why there are ghetto kids who do pull out of this rather than why nobody does. It seems to me miraculous that some of them decide to be honest.
For a moment, I think it's a great mistake to suppose that crime and the ghetto are synonymous terms. You have an enormous upsurgence of crime on the part of middle-class kids. If anything, if you make any general statement, crime is a property of young people.
The violent crime of middle-class children and so forth is probably encouraged, especially by the leniency of sentencing at that area, because there again the middle class has secured ways of excusing its own from responsibility for their actions.
Now, are you saying, as a matter, you're saying that the certainty and the severity of punishment has gone down over time?
I believe there's more discretion now in the criminal law than there has been at any other point.
There's something also, though, I think there's been some kind of shift even in societal values at large, which may have something to do with all of this.
But let me take it one step further, because I believe there's another cause in there that we haven't even touched on. And that is there are more crimes today than there used to be. In the one place, there are more laws to break. But in the second place, if you have a proliferation of laws, and many of which people don't think are right and proper, that encourages a disrespect for law in general. We saw that before the problem of the welfare state arose, if you took it back in the 1920s when you had Prohibition. And you had lawlessness emerge in the getting around the Prohibition Amendment. And one of the results of that was a decline in respect for law in general. And so I believe one of the arguments we ought to make against having so many laws, and that one of the most effective, and this is, in a way, I'm turning to the problem of remedies, that one of the most effective remedies for the problem of crime is to reduce the number of things that are crimes. I believe in free trade. I don't believe there ought to be any tariff laws. I think tariff laws are fundamentally immoral, not moral. And so I don't mind getting rid of tariff laws. Now, a more controversial case is the whole class of what are called victimless crimes. That includes things like drugs. It includes things like prostitution.
Our laws
take drugs, take these things one at a time. The usual argument, anyways, presented for the abolition of drug laws is prohibition. Prohibition didn't work. But it seems to me that that analogy is utterly fallacious, insofar as liquor has been a cultural institution for, I mean, forever. It was widespread when everybody drank when they tried to legalize liquor.
Before 1914, a very large number of people were on drugs. Wasn't illegal at all. Opium and so on could be widely purchased. You know, many of these medicine men who sold medicines were really selling drugs.
Well, when China was wide open to opium, they were also wide open to being manipulated by foreign countries because of their dependence on opium.
That's a big leap in the dark about because. But I think drugs raise a very interesting question on two different levels. The first level, as a matter of what you regard as just and proper, as ethical. Is it right to have laws against drugs? Second, even if you believe it is right, is it expedient to do so? So you have an issue on both the ethical level. And I personally, I may say my own view is very straightforward. On both levels, I think, laws against drugs cannot be justified, except in the very limited sense of protecting young people and juveniles. But if I take adults, tell me, Harry, do you believe in a law against people committing suicide?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
You don't believe that people should be free to commit suicide?
No, I believe that one of the primary responsibilities of government is to protect its citizens. And it seems to me protecting them from themselves is what you do with people who are insane. And I don't think that you can say suicide is an entirely personal matter.
The law against suicide, in any event, is a kind of moral tribute to Western values because it's so ineffectual.
But it brings out the fundamental issue, because I think it's the easiest way to separate people who have two very widely different sets of values. See, I don't view government the way you do at all. I view government as a way in which we jointly do certain things together that it would be difficult or impossible for us to do separately. It's an instrument through which we achieve our values. It is not something that's going to impose its values on us. And I agree, those are two very different philosophical views of the role of government, and both of them, I may say, have very respectable and honorable sponsors, so there's nothing wrong with it.
The problem with drugs, and this is an old argument I recognize, that drugs have aspects of contagious diseases. They are addictive, they spread through communities quickly.
I think on the same grounds you're prepared to ban Marx's Das Kapital from publication. It surely has killed and done an enormous, more people, and done an enormous amount more harm than all the drugs that anybody has ever ingested.
Well, if you could make me a good argument that banning Das Kapital would have prevented that damage, would have eliminated Soviet Russia and Communist China,
I can't. And the reason I can't is because if you once accept the principle that it's okay to ban Das Kapital on those grounds, then it's also okay to ban anything else.
No, because you're reducing decision-making to a completely formal level. You're putting us on this slippery slope. In fact, we can think about things, and we can decide that banning Das Kapital is okay, but banning something about Galbraith isn't.
Who is a we? Who is a we who can think that way?
Men thinking about problems and making these decisions.
But you mean there's going to be some governmental official who will make the decision?
There's no escape.
There's not going to be a vote.
There is no escape from making decisions. And setting up these formal protections is an attempt to avoid these decisions. You and I can distinguish between heroin and marijuana. And there's no point, really, to our giving ourselves up to that formal decision that we're not going to have any rules against drugs, rather than making the better judgment that we're going to eliminate the bad ones and leave in the not so bad.
If our aim is controlled drug use and to try and minimize the use of drugs because we think the effect is harmful and we think it's appropriate for us to determine what another individual can do to harm his or her body, there are more effective means to do that. Britain, for example, controls its heroin addiction rate in a much more effective manner than the United States. I think the statistics in the two countries are quite clear that a legalized method, legalizing the use to a certain extent, registering the heroin addicts, and having a government dispensing system for heroin, both controls the rate of growth of heroin addiction and minimizes the concomitant crime problem which is produced by making heroin addiction illegal.
So you would make the case that legalization might cause a decline in the number of drug users?
I think that if what we're concerned about is a decline in the number of drug users, that's precisely what we need to do.
Right. Legalization, look, let me give you a very different argument, Harry. With drugs illegal, there is a market incentive for a drug pusher to create addicts. If I'm a drug pusher and you're a potential addict, I can afford to give you some free samples to get you hooked, because once you're hooked, you're going to be a captive customer. But the other expediential argument, the other side of that argument, is that prohibiting drugs, by all evidence, accounts that the drug addicts and drug addiction accounts for something like half of all major crimes of violence. Because those crimes are produced by people who are hooked, who don't have enough money to buy their next dose, and who go out and steal and so on in order to get the money. And they have to do that because drugs are so incredibly expensive, and they are expensive because they're illegal, because we interfere with them. If you had a legal source of drugs at relatively low prices, which they would be, you would, it seems to me, drastically eliminate this whole category of crime.